The courtyard of the towering corporate plaza buzzed with the usual rhythm of power, sharp suits, clattering heels, briefcases clicking shut. But in the middle of all that noise came a voice that cut through like a blade. "Don't get in the car." Heads whipped around. Executives froze mid-step. Even the morning breeze seemed to pause. And standing there, broom forgotten at his feet, was not a bodyguard or an executive but a janitor. His name was Daniel. For a heartbeat no one understood. Why would a janitor, a man invisible to most of the company, dare to shout at the CEO herself? Who was he to raise his voice, to stop her in her tracks? But then came the sound. A faint metallic click beneath the glossy black sedan parked at the curb. Too subtle for anyone else to notice, but unmistakable in the silence that followed his warning. In that instant, fear rushed across Catherine Hale's face, the kind of fear no corner office or billion-dollar empire could shield her from. This was no ordinary moment. This was a collision of worlds. A CEO at the peak of power and a single dad janitor whose only weapon was instinct and courage. And now, everything, a life, a company's future, and the dreams of a little girl waiting at home, hung in the balance. The screen freezes on Catherine's outstretched hand, inches away from the car door handle. Narrator's voice cuts in. Why would a janitor risk everything to stop the most powerful woman in the company? What gave him the courage to speak when everyone else stood silent? And what did he see that no one else noticed? Quick flashes, Catherine's heels striking marble like a metronome. Daniel's daughter Lily, sleeping beneath a faded blanket, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. A shadowy wire slipping from under the car door, barely visible in the light. All these moments crash together in a storm of images, until everything halts again. To understand why this mattered, to know why the janitor shouted those life-saving words, we need to rewind. Long before the chaos of that courtyard, before the shout that stopped the CEO in her tracks, there was just another morning in Daniel's small rented apartment. The alarm clock buzzed at 5 a.m., but truth be told, Daniel was already awake. Most mornings he lay staring at the cracked ceiling, his thoughts racing faster than the city outside ever would. Beside him, curled beneath a faded blanket, was his daughter Lily. Only 8 years old, her hair a tangle of soft curls, her little arms wrapped tightly around a stuffed rabbit that had lost one ear years ago but had never lost its place in her heart. For Daniel, that rabbit was more than a toy, it was a reminder of everything fragile and precious he was fighting to protect. He kissed her forehead gently before slipping out of bed. His mornings were built on quiet rituals, scrambling eggs, toasting bread, pouring milk into a chipped glass. He made her breakfast as if it were a feast, because for Lily, even simple food tasted better when her father placed it before her with a smile. Before she woke, he always tucked a folded note into her lunchbox, a smiley face, a tiny "love you kiddo," or a reminder to dream big. These little gestures weren't luxuries, they were lifelines, threads that held their small world together. Daniel carried more than just the weight of his janitor's uniform. He carried grief. 2 years earlier, he had lost his wife, the woman who had been his partner in laughter, in worry, in survival. Since then, every day had been a battle to play both roles, father and mother, provider and comforter. His eyes were tired, his body weary from working double shifts, but his heart never allowed him to quit. He had promised Lily a better future, and though he wasn't sure how, he clung to that promise like a rope on a cliffside. By 6:30 he was standing before the towering glass and steel of the corporate headquarters. The building glittered in the morning light, as if it were built not of stone but of ambition itself. Executives poured in like a river of pressed suits and polished shoes, their phones glued to their ears, their minds racing with numbers and deals. In the middle of it all, Daniel swiped his badge, entered through the service entrance, and disappeared into a world no one else cared to see. To them he was invisible. Just a man with a mop bucket, just another pair of hands changing trash liners. They walked past him as though he were a fixture of the building, no different than the marble floors he polished. But Daniel noticed everything. He saw the nervous tremor in an intern's hand before a big meeting, the flickering light that made employees squint, the lipstick smudge wiped away in the bathroom mirror after someone cried quietly inside. He collected fragments of other people's lives the way dust settled into corners, silently, unnoticed. No one thanked him for it and he never asked them to. On that particular morning, as Daniel leaned on his broom in the wide courtyard, watching the sun bounce off the skyscraper's glass walls, it felt like any other day. Ordinary. Predictable. But the truth? This day was anything but ordinary. While Daniel swept the marble tiles and emptied trash bins, another world moved just above him, one he could see but never touch. It was the world of Catherine Hale. Catherine wasn't just the CEO of the company, she was its symbol. At only 32, she had risen through the ranks with a force that left even her critics silent. Newspapers called her the lightning bolt of Wall Street, a woman whose eyes seemed to calculate profits before a calculator could. Every step she took echoed like authority, every decision she made rippled across boardrooms and bank accounts. To the people under her command, Catherine was sharp, decisive, even intimidating. She didn't waste words. She didn't soften her tone. And in a city where hesitation meant defeat, her confidence was her crown. Executives respected her, interns feared her, competitors envied her. To most, she was untouchable. And yet, while the corporate elite saw a queen in heels, Daniel only saw another human being. A woman who, like everyone else, left coffee cups behind for him to collect, whose footprints he polished away each evening. His respect for her wasn't built on headlines or magazine covers. It came quietly from watching how someone so young held up the weight of an empire. She was everything he could never be, polished, powerful, unshaken. But he admired her all the same. The contrast between their worlds could not have been sharper. Catherine stepped out of sleek cars with tinted windows. Daniel waited for crowded buses that smelled of dust and sweat. Catherine's wardrobe was curated from boutiques and designer racks. Daniel's uniform was a navy jumpsuit with soap stains that never quite washed out. Catherine spoke to investors about millions. Daniel spoke to his daughter about saving coins in a jar. Every morning their lives crossed paths in fleeting, invisible ways. She swept into the building surrounded by assistants and guards, heels striking like a metronome on marble. He stood in the corner with his broom, lowering his head as she passed. If her eyes glanced toward him at all, it was the same glance one gives a shadow on the wall. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't even malice. It was hierarchy. In Catherine's world, Daniel was simply not there. He existed in the blind spot of power, present, necessary but invisible. And Daniel understood this. He had never expected to be noticed. People like him weren't remembered in corner offices. They were remembered at home, in tiny apartments where children clung to stuffed rabbits and called them heroes. That was enough for him. Still, there were times when he looked at Catherine and wondered what it felt like to live in her skin. To wake up in penthouses instead of cramped bedrooms, to have people hanging on every word instead of ignoring your presence. He didn't envy her, not exactly. Envy would have been wasted energy. But there was a quiet curiosity, a small flicker of awe at what she had built and what he had lost. In another life, maybe their paths would never have crossed at all. She would have kept climbing glass towers and he would have kept scrubbing their windows. Two galaxies spinning far apart, never touching. But life has a way of shattering those invisible walls. Because on this particular day, Catherine Hale's perfect, polished world was about to collide with Daniel's tired, unpolished one. And when it did, neither of them, not the CEO with her empire, nor the janitor with his broom, would ever see the other in the same light again. The late morning sun hung high, striking the mirrored glass of the corporate tower until the courtyard gleamed like a stage. Employees spilled out for coffee runs, assistants rushed across the marble with folders pressed to their chests, and security guards scanned the plaza with their usual practiced indifference. Then a ripple of attention spread through the crowd. Catherine Hale had emerged. She stepped out of the revolving doors like royalty crossing into her kingdom. Her stride was crisp, heels snapping against the stone in perfect rhythm. A pair of executives scrambled to keep up with her pace, offering updates she barely acknowledged. Catherine didn't glance at the chaos of the plaza. Her eyes were fixed on the sleek black sedan idling by the curb, waiting for her. For everyone else, it was routine, the CEO leaving for another meeting, another empire-shaping conversation. But for Daniel, leaning against his broom not far from the building's edge, something was wrong. At first, it was only a flicker at the corner of his vision. A detail most people would miss. But Daniel never missed details. His entire life depended on noticing the small things others ignored, the crack in a pipe before it burst, the stain on a tile before it spread, the exhaustion in his daughter's eyes before she fell sick. His gaze sharpened. The car. Polished, shining, sleek as always. But the driver not the same one. The usual chauffeur was older, a man who nodded politely at Daniel every morning, who carried himself with relaxed confidence. This one was younger, stiffer, his eyes darting nervously toward Catherine as she drew closer. Daniel frowned. His chest tightened. He looked again. That's when he saw it. A faint wire slipping just beneath the driver's side door, barely visible in the glare of sunlight. To anyone else it was nothing. But to Daniel it screamed danger. His pulse quickened. Memories flashed, long nights watching crime reports after Lily was asleep, reading stories of corporate sabotage, revenge, violence hidden beneath the gloss of power. His instincts had carried him through fatherhood alone, had saved him from mistakes when he couldn't afford them. Those instincts were screaming now. The air grew heavier with every step Catherine took toward the car. He could hear the click of her heels echoing in his skull, each one like a countdown. Click, closer, click, closer. Executives murmured beside her. Guards scanned the area but didn't see what he saw. Daniel's throat tightened. What if he was wrong? What if he embarrassed himself, shouted at the CEO for nothing, and lost the job he needed to keep Lily alive? But then he pictured his daughter. Lily waiting at school for him to pick her up. Lily clutching her stuffed rabbit in her sleep. Lily who depended on him to keep promises that seemed impossible. He could not ignore his gut. Catherine's hand lifted, reaching for the car door handle. Daniel's broom clattered to the ground. His legs moved before his mind fully caught up, carrying him across the courtyard in desperate strides. His voice tore through the morning like a siren, raw, urgent, impossible to ignore. Don't get in the car. The courtyard froze. Every head turned. Executives halted mid-conversation, their words cut short by the force in his voice. Security guards spun, startled, eyes narrowing at the janitor who dared to break the calm. Catherine froze, her hand hovering inches above the door handle, her brow furrowing in confusion. For one endless second, the plaza was locked in silence. Daniel stood with his hand raised, his chest heaving, his eyes locked on hers. And in that silence, the faint sound came, metallic, small, but lethal. Click. A sound that told her in an instant that this was no false alarm. The silence after Daniel's shout felt heavy, suffocating. Dozens of eyes burned into him, executives with raised brows, security guards gripping radios, assistants clutching clipboards. Catherine's hand hovered above the car door handle, her face hard with irritation and confusion. And then it came. Click. The metallic snap echoed beneath the vehicle, sharp as a needle breaking skin. It was faint, subtle, but in the quiet Daniel's warning had carved, it rang out like thunder. Catherine froze. Her fingers stiffened inches away from the polished steel handle. For the first time that morning, her mask of confidence cracked, fear rushing into her chest like ice water. "Ma'am, step back," one guard barked, lunging forward. Another shoved aside the startled executives, reaching for her arm. Catherine's eyes flickered toward Daniel, the janitor, the man in the stained navy uniform, and in that split second she saw what he saw. A thin, almost invisible wire dangled from beneath the driver's door, shivering in the sunlight like a snake waiting to strike. Daniel's voice cut through again, stronger, desperate. "There's something under the car." Chaos erupted. Security surged around Catherine, pulling her back in a shield of black suits and broad shoulders. Executives gasped, some stumbling back, others whispering in disbelief. The driver, the unfamiliar, nervous man, jerked upright in the front seat, his hands fumbling near the dashboard. His eyes widened, caught in the crossfire of attention. Daniel pointed, his arm trembling but firm. "There. Look under the car." Two guards dropped low, crouching by the wheels. One sucked in a sharp breath, the other cursed under his breath. The object glinted in the shadows, a crude but unmistakably lethal device strapped beneath the sedan, its wires snaking into a small timer box. The red digits glowed faintly, an omen of seconds slipping away. A bomb. The courtyard erupted in panic. Employees screamed and scattered, heels and shoes clattering across marble as the once orderly plaza dissolved into chaos. Radios crackled, shouts flew, and guards moved Catherine swiftly away, shielding her body with their own. But amidst the madness, one truth blazed clear. Had Daniel not spoken, had he not risked humiliation and worse, Catherine Hale, CO, symbol of power, untouchable force, would have opened that car door. And in moments, fire and shrapnel would have swallowed her world whole. Instead, a janitor had stopped it. Catherine's breath came in sharp bursts as the reality sank in. She turned her head once more, her eyes locking on Daniel across the distance. His chest heaved, his face tight with adrenaline, but his gaze held steady. He hadn't shouted for glory or recognition or reward. He had shouted because his instincts told him someone's life was about to end, and he couldn't let that happen. For years she had walked past him without truly seeing him. And now, in the span of seconds, his voice had saved her life. The crowd shifted. The same executives who once sneered at the invisible janitor now stared with wide-eyed awe. Their whispers carried through the courtyard. Did he just? He saw it before anyone else. That janitor, he saved her. Daniel bent slowly, retrieving his fallen broom with shaking hands. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, and part of him wished he could vanish back into the shadows. But there was no erasing what had just happened. The truth was undeniable. On that bright morning, it wasn't the polished guards or the high-paid executives who stopped disaster. It wasn't power or wealth or prestige that shielded Catherine Hale from death. It was a single father in a Navy uniform. A man invisible to most, but alive with instincts sharpened by hardship and love for the daughter waiting at home. The bomb was dismantled minutes later, defused by emergency specialists who rushed to the scene. The car was towed away, the driver taken into custody, the company shaken to its core. And though the chaos left the courtyard trembling, one image burned brighter than all the rest. Daniel, the janitor, standing tall in his stained uniform with nothing but courage to his name, and yet, in that moment, more powerful than any executive in the building. The courtyard that only minutes ago bustled with confidence now felt hollow, stripped bare. Executives who had strutted proudly in pressed suits stood huddled in uneasy clusters. Security guards who normally exuded control barked hurried orders into radios, their movements sharp with fear. Even the sunlight seemed different now, less golden, more glaring, exposing the vulnerability that had always hidden beneath the surface of power. And at the center of it all stood Catherine Hale. She was no longer the unshakable CEO marching across marble like she owned the earth beneath her heels. Her shoulders trembled. Her lips pressed tightly together as though to contain the storm inside her chest. She was alive, yes. But alive because of a man she had never once truly seen. Her eyes drifted across the crowd, searching until they landed on him. Daniel. He stood a few yards away, broom back in his hand, though he wasn't sweeping. His posture was stiff, his chest still heaving, the adrenaline refusing to release him. Yet in his face there was no triumph, no smugness, no demand for applause. Only exhaustion. Only the weary relief of a man who had done what he had to do, nothing more, nothing less. Their eyes met. For the briefest moment, the courtyard noise fell away. Catherine saw not a janitor but a man who had risked his livelihood, his safety, maybe even his life to protect her. And Daniel, in turn, saw not a CEO, not a towering figure of ambition, but a human being whose carefully constructed world had nearly shattered in an instant. The spell broke with a chorus of whispers. He saved her. She'd be gone if not for him. That janitor, what's his name again? Names mattered now. The man in the Navy uniform was no longer invisible. He was the reason Catherine still drew breath. Daniel lowered his eyes, trying to retreat into the background, but he couldn't escape the weight of what had just unfolded. His thoughts darted to Lily. She'd be getting out of school in a few hours, expecting him to pick her up, expecting a smile and maybe a silly story about his day. He pictured her small arms wrapping around him, the stuffed rabbit dangling in her hand. That image grounded him. She was the reason he had shouted. Not because he craved recognition, but because her little world depended on his survival, and by extension on his courage. The crowd began to disperse, but Catherine did not move. She straightened her back, her heels steadying against the stone, though her pulse still thundered in her ears. Against the advice of her guards, she stepped forward. The executives murmured in protest, but she silenced them with a single glance. She walked across the plaza, every eye following her, until she stood before Daniel. For the first time she truly looked at him. Not at the uniform, not at the broom, but at the man. His tired eyes, his worn hands, the weight of both love and grief etched into the lines of his face. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. Daniel, thank you. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Executives who once dismissed him as background now shifted uncomfortably, realizing how easily they could have lost everything if not for this man. Guards lowered their gaze, ashamed they had not seen what he had. The entire hierarchy of the courtyard tilted, if only for a moment. Daniel swallowed, unsure how to respond. Gratitude from a CEO was not something he had ever expected to hear. He nodded once modestly and murmured, "Just did what anyone would have done." But Catherine shook her head. "No. You did what no one else did." It was a symbolic reversal. The janitor, once invisible, now protector. The CEO, once untouchable, now humbled. Power was not in money or marble towers. Power had been in a father's instinct, in a man's refusal to ignore what his eyes told him. Around them, the whispers grew louder, morphing into admiration. Courage like that. Unbelievable. He didn't even hesitate. For once, Daniel didn't feel like a shadow. He felt seen. Not for his uniform, not for the job that wore him down, but for the man he was inside, the father who would fight the world for his daughter, the worker who noticed the details others ignored, the human being who had refused to stay silent when silence would have cost a life. Catherine's gaze softened. She extended her hand, an unprecedented gesture from a woman known for her distance. Daniel hesitated, then reached out. Their handshake was firm, brief, but it spoke volumes. Acknowledgement, equality, a quiet bond forged in crisis. In that moment, respect flowed both ways. The courtyard would never forget what happened that day. Not because a bomb had been found, but because a line had been crossed, between invisibility and recognition, between hierarchy and humanity. Daniel would return to his uniform, to his broom, to his quiet apartment with Lily. Catherine would return to boardrooms and decisions that shaped futures. But neither of them would walk past the other unchanged again. Because courage had shifted the balance. Because the janitor had become the protector. And because the world had finally seen him. The courtyard eventually emptied, the chaos settled, and the news would later call it a near tragedy averted. But behind the headlines, the truth remained simple. It wasn't wealth, titles, or polished shoes that stopped disaster. It was a man no one noticed, a single father who carried the quiet strength of love and loss in his chest. Heroes don't always wear badges or sit in corner offices. Sometimes they wear stained uniforms and carry the weight of unseen dreams. Sometimes their courage doesn't come from training or power, but from instinct, from knowing they cannot afford to stay silent when it matters most. Daniel didn't save Catherine because she was a CEO. He didn't act because the cameras were watching. He acted because he saw danger, because his heart told him to, because every day he lived for a daughter who depended on him. That was enough. That was everything. Humility over power. Courage over status. Humanity over hierarchy. These are the values that outlast buildings and boardrooms. And so the question now passes to you: what would you have done if you were in Daniel's place? Would you have spoken up? Risked your livelihood? Risked humiliation, even your safety? Or would fear have held your tongue? It is easy to underestimate the quiet ones, the overlooked, the invisible. But when the moment comes, when the world trembles at the edge of disaster, it is often their voices that cut through the noise. Sometimes the strongest hearts beat quietly in the shadows, until the moment the world needs them most. If this story moved you, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope today, and tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to Kindness Corner. Because together, we can remind the world that extraordinary courage often comes from the most ordinary of people.